CASAT Podcast Network.
Welcome to Season 5 of CASAT Conversations, a holistic look at mental health. Join us for a series of thought-provoking conversations that delve into the vast dimensions of mental well-being. From the intricate link between physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of well-being to the latest scientific research, practices, and therapies, we navigate the multifaceted landscape of mental health together. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Russel Foster today, head of Nuffield Laboratory of Ophthalmology and the director of the Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute. Welcome, Dr. Foster. It's so nice to have you here today.
I'm delighted to join you, Heather.
And I should say welcome, Russell. As we get started, please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you do the work that you do.
Oh, that's such a deep question. A little bit about myself. Okay, well, I guess I'm a very ordinary person who's just found the thing I love. And so I just have enormous pleasure in doing the science that I do and asking the questions that I can ask. And it's sort of something that I think has been with me all my life. I at the early age of, I think it was, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something, I put a fly in a test tube and, put cotton wool in the end of the test tube and put it on of course, in those days, it was turntables. You won't know what that is, but it was sort of a thing you put records on, it whizzed round. And I wanted to know if this fly had, would get dizzy. And anyway, did the experiment, let the fly out of the glass tube, and it flew off perfectly normally. And so that was so cool. I mean, it didn't have the same mechanisms that make us dizzy when we get spun around. And I suppose it's always been asking those questions of how does it work? And then why does it work? So I then drifted into the regulation of light on our biological systems, and that took me into biological clocks and sleep. So that's kind of the journey, but really just found my niche. And I think what's so sad actually about education these days is that we're not given the opportunity to find what we're good at. I should add that as a young kid, I was in remedial classes. I mean, I just was off in my own world doing my own thing. It was only later that I kind of woke up and thought, oh, this is cool, and then put some energy into
it. I love that. So curious from the beginning and really curious about our world and making sense about it, it sounds like.
Yes, and also, I remember I was given at an early age, again, probably about the same time, 8 or something, a microscope. And we all were given these, I think childhood microscopes, and we remember them. And I remember getting, looking at a fly's wing or a bee's sting or something like that. But they were tiny little things. And I remember my eyelashes used to get in the way of the objective piece. So I, cut my eyelashes off on one eye. And it, solved the problem. But I remember at dinner that evening, my mother said to me, "What have you done?" And I said, "Well, my eyelashes were getting in the way." And she said, "Well, they serve a purpose. You shouldn't really do that." And I sort of said, I think something like, "Well, I only did it in one eye." And she sort of looked heavenward for help. But yes, I've just kind of been a bit geeky and weird, I suppose.
I love that. I love that. So since your work began really studying light and our circadian rhythm, I'd love for you to explain to us really the impact of light on our sleep, just as we get started.
Well, there's 2 really important impacts of light. The first is we have an internal biological clock that ticks away. And what it does is fine-tune our biology. If you think about it, what our biology needs to do is deliver the right stuff at the right concentration to the right tissues and organs at the right time of day. And it's the circadian system that provides this time structure for life. But unless that master clock is regulated by the outside world so that the biological day and the solar day are beautifully aligned, the adaptive value of a clock of this beautiful fine tuning is completely gone, and our biology falls apart. And the key thing is, without entrainment, without the setting of the clock to the external world, primarily by light, things would be a complete disaster. So I got fascinated on the input side of things and how clocks regulate, how light regulates clocks, and therefore the sleep-wake systems. But there's a second function of light, which is sort of an acute effect of light, which when we're exposed to bright light, we're more alert. So there's there's multiple effects. We're beginning to understand that there are centers within the brain which receive light input that regulate our mood. So we've got alertness, we've got our mood, and perhaps other faculties as well. And of course, this fascination led our team to discover that there's another light sensor within the eye. There's the visual system, which detects images of our world, and that uses the rod and cone photoreceptors, which we're all familiar with. But we discovered that there's a third receptor in the eye that detects broad changes in the light environment at dawn and dusk, for example, and that can set the biological clock to the external world. And so much of my life has been understanding how light interacts with circadian and sleep systems.
And I'm struck really by the wisdom and the intricacies, right, of the human body and how wise it is in the interconnected nature between us and nature.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think one of the great strengths of being a human being is that we're supremely arrogant. We believe we can do anything we want at any time of the day, and of course we're not. We are connected to nature just like every other organism, and what we've spent the last 200 or 300 years is trying to convince ourselves that we aren't part of the environment and that we can act independently without consequences of the natural world, and most notably the light-dark cycle. And of course we can't. And I think the exciting thing for me is that we're beginning to realize that we are part of the natural world and we need to respect those relationships. Otherwise, we set ourselves up for failure.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, really, I'm thinking about shift workers and the impact, because these are people who likely want to be sleeping at night, but their work doesn't allow them to. And so what is the impact of not sleeping based on this rhythm?
Yeah. Well, of course, the assumption has been and was for many years that shift workers adapt to the demands of working at night, and they don't. 97% of people never adapt to the night shift work. And that's going back to light again. So what's happening is that we're working under relatively dim light in the factory or the office at night. And then we experience bright natural light during the day, the drive home from work or the drive into work. And the clock will always defer to the brighter light signal as being daytime, which of course it is. And so the clock does not shift. And experiments have been done from lovely work from Harvard showing that they increase the amount of light in the workplace and then shielded people from natural light during the day. And they adapted just like you adapt as after getting over jet lag. But of course, for all practical purposes, that isn't possible. So what we're doing is working against this entire biology saying you should be asleep. And so you can't expect to optimal performance. And furthermore, if you keep on driving our biology outside of its normal range, it begins to fall apart. I've likened it to an engine. If you put an engine to first gear, if you have a stick shift, that is, and of course then you'll know what I'm talking about. That's great because you get that acceleration, you can get away. But if you keep the engine in first gear, it destroys itself. And that's very much like what we're trying to do by working against our biology at night during the night shift. So the consequences are increasingly clear. We've moved from anecdote 20 years ago to really beautiful studies from groups all over the world. So if we just sort of summarize it into 3 domains, which is our emotional responses. So we see increased fluctuations in mood, anxiety, irritability, loss of empathy. We fail to pick up those social signals from friends, family, and whatever. We just don't get it. Increased levels of frustration, a negative salience. Now, this is really important because some lovely studies from Germany have shown that the tired brain is much more likely to remember negative experiences than positive ones. So if you're working against this biology and you're tired, you're remembering the negative stuff. So your whole worldview is framed by what you remember in terms of negative experiences. You're much more likely to undertake sort of risky impulsive behaviors, which is, so you think you can make that red stoplight. No, you can't. And if you were not tired, you'd never dream of it. But, you just lost that critical capacity of the brain. You're much more likely to use sedatives and stimulants, and so slide into a sedative. So you're sort of trying to get to sleep at night, but you're not producing natural sleep. You're using sleeping tablets or alcohol, and then to reverse that during the day and keep awake during the day, you're using coffee at the mild end of the spectrum, and then perhaps even things like amphetamines at the other end of the spectrum. So that's our sort of emotional responses. Our cognitive responses, well, overall, our ability to process information is down. Our ability to multitask. And what I mean by that is, we're all making decisions. We're bombarded with information. And what we've got to do is extract the important salient stuff. And it's much more difficult to do that if you're chronically tired. Our memory consolidation goes. Not only that, but sleep is so important for processing information. So if you want to come up with innovative solutions to complex complex problems, then a night of sleep could actually help you do that. So, in a world where our ability to solve problems has never been at a greater premium, we're actually depriving ourselves of that incredible capacity. I've called sleep the greatest cognitive enhancer that we have available to us. Communication skills fall apart, decision, creativity, productivity, and all of that sort of stuff gets lost. But then if we experience long-term sleep disruption, as you see in many long-term night shift workers who have been doing the job for 5, 10, and sometimes 30 years, then we see some really big issues developing. First of all, chronic daytime sleepiness. So you just never catch up. And so you're running on empty, even when you are awake. And of course, daytime sleepiness can give rise to microsleeps, which means falling asleep at the wheel, for example. And there's a study actually fairly recently on junior doctors from the UK showing that 57% had either had a crash or a near miss, 57% on the drive home after the night shift. Oh, it's huge. I think in the United States, there's been estimates that between 100,000 and 300,000 crashes on the freeway are associated with people falling asleep at the wheel. You've got altered cardiovascular issues, so blood pressure issues fall apart, possibly as a result of altered stress responses. How do we overcome this overwhelming need to sleep? Well, we activate the stress axis, and of course that can lead to higher blood pressure. We're throwing glucose into the circulation to because we're anticipating to either fight or run away, and if we're not using it, then of course those levels build up, greater propensity to metabolic abnormalities, diabetes 2. And in fact, there's a relationship between raised stress, reduced immunity, higher risk of cancer. So, for example, the correlations between higher rates of cancer and night shift work are now so strong that night shift work has been declared a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. I mean, this is serious stuff. And of course, some of the biggies like depression and psychosis. There is a very clear relationship that if you are at any risk of developing depression and psychosis, then sleep disruption will push you further into that sort of spectrum. And then very recently, sleep disruption in the middle years has been associated with a greater risk of dementia in the later years. The mechanistic link there is very interesting because whilst we sleep, we clear a misfolded protein called beta amyloid. And so it packages up and gets rid of it. If you don't sleep, it tends to be deposited within the brain. And in fact, some wonderful studies from the Netherlands have shown that just one night of no sleep can increase very, very small amounts deposition of beta amyloid within the brain. And of course, it's the build up of beta amyloid in cells, which has been linked to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So I think the key point is that not getting the sleep that you need at the time that you need it is not simply sort of the inconvenience of feeling tired at the wrong time, but it's associated with short-term and long-term health issues. As I say, we just think we can override it, and we can't. And thank goodness now there's some realization that we need to work with our biology and within the environment.
I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking back to what you said about our arrogance, that we think we can just like keep on going.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
We just, no big deal.
Yeah, no. So we just think we're detached from our environment. It's really quite remarkable. But that arrogance has, of course, led us to some successes. But boy, we've got to learn to tame it in the context of our sleep.
Yeah, and learn to care for our bodies, right? Like listen to them.
And of course, the impact of not having a good body, the way we interact with others, and danger to the broader community. We're more at risk of crashing into people or making stupid mistakes. Worth bearing in mind that some of the big disasters, the Exxon Valdez, the nuclear, the Chernobyl, were all as a result, or there was a major contribution of tired individuals making inappropriate decisions and leading to potentially catastrophic environmental disasters.
Yeah, the ripple effect, which I hadn't considered.
Yeah. So there's a social responsibility that it's not just us, and being jocks and running off and doing daft stuff. There are implications to our stupidity.
Mm-hmm. How do we know if we're getting enough sleep?
Well, this is the easy bit, and this is the kind of thing that our grandparents probably told us, but we didn't have the wit to remember. And it's really straightforward. If you feel that you're not performing at your peak during the day, chances are you didn't get a good night of sleep. There are other metrics. So if you oversleep extensively on free days, and particularly when you go on holiday, you can really unpack what your sleep needs are. You're dependent upon an alarm clock or another person to get you out of bed in the morning. If you take a long time to wake up, you've got this grogginess, this sleep inertia. If you feel sleepy, irritable, fatigued when you are awake, if you crave a nap during the day, and we can talk about naps in more detail later, if you are aware that you're doing stupid, overly impulsive things, going back to the failure to be reflective about one's behaviors, if you crave caffeinated and sugar-rich drinks, and also if your family, friends, colleagues say, you're showing increased levels of irritability or loss of empathy, or you're just not a nice person as you used to be, and you're doing silly and disinhibited things. Now, most of us don't take very kindly to those sorts of criticisms, but actually they can be immensely useful in, assessing whether we're getting the sleep that we need. So it really is important to listen to the people that we work with and the people that we live our lives with. So collectively, those are the sorts of metrics. If you're not getting that, then you're not getting sleep. And actually, Heather, a really important point, and the reason I wrote the book Lifetime was because I was so irritated that people were saying, you must do this, you can't do this within the context of sleep. So, there's this myth that you have to get 8 hours of sleep. Well, yes, 8 hours is the average, but in fact, the healthy range is between 6 hours and 10 and a half hours. And the key thing is we have to define for ourselves what our sleep duration needs are, and indeed our sleep timing. Because, of course, we come to the concept of chronotype, whether you're a morning person, an intermediate, or an evening person. And that's a real phenomenon. And we can talk about the reasons for that in a moment. And essentially, having defined what your sleep needs are and your sleep timing is, you then have to try and build a structure around your life that allows you to get the optimum sleep that you as an individual need, and not be pressurized into not getting the sleep that you need, as so many of us are. There's this sort of, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I then go to the gym and da 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 da. Well, yeah, sure, you can do that for a few years before you essentially fall apart.
I'm curious, will you share with us how sleep changes across the lifespan, the need?
Yeah. Well, that's what's so interesting. There's two really, well, there's three really interesting issues. One is, so from about the age of 10, uh, there's a tendency to want to go to bed later and later and later. And that lateness peaks in the late teens, early 20s. Now, interestingly, it peaks slightly earlier in women than men. And men, on average, tend to be later chronotypes than women. And from the sort of the early 20s, there's a move slowly to want to go to bed earlier and earlier and earlier. So by the time you get into your late 50s, early 60s, you're getting up and going to bed at about the time you got up and went to bed when you were 10 or so. So, and on average, somebody in their late 50s, early 60s will want to go to bed about 2 hours earlier than somebody in their late teens or late 20s. And that seems to be due to the changing levels of sex steroids, estrogen, testosterone in men, estrogen in women, as that rises sharply through puberty and then changes. So our sleep our sleep timing, our chronotype will change. Sleep duration tends to get a bit shorter, but not always. And it tends to get a bit more fragmented. So there's a greater chance of waking up in the middle of the night. And the reasons for that, it's really interesting, seem to be that as we age, this circadian drive for sleep, which is very robust when we're young and in the middle years. So, awake during the day, asleep at night. That tends to flatten out a bit, along with a bunch of other circadian rhythms. So sleep is not as strongly driven by the clock as we age, but it's also accompanied by other things. So, for example, the hormones underpinning the production of urine. So many elderly people come up to me and say, why do I wake up in the middle of the night? And there's two explanations for that. One is that there's this sort of less consolidated sleep, but also the hormones underpinning urine production are sort of slightly damped out. So it should be lots of urine during the day, no urine at night. But that's sort of not quite as the drive isn't quite as strong. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind is if you're spending all your time sitting in a chair all day and you've got some blood pressure issues, then of course your ankles become puffy and fluid accumulates in the lower limbs. And studies have shown that when you lie down after a day of sitting, that blood and the plasma in the blood needs to get reintegrated into the body. And that fluid can generate a litre of urine simply by lying down. So that's, part of the reason of an additional reason why you need to get up and pee. So it's so important in the elderly to keep moving around and get that blood, not sort of settling in the lower limbs. So yeah, our sleep will change, our chronotype will change, and it's due to changing hormonal levels, changing circadian drive by the clock, and other things. Our physiological systems, such as urine production, are changing as we age. Now, I talked about waking up at night, and people get terribly anxious about this. If you look at societies without electricity, then sleep is what's called bimodal or polymodal. People will have a gentle settling down, which may be 1 or 2 hours. They may go to sleep for a few hours, wake up, interact with others in various ways, then go back to sleep again, and then wake up, and then maybe go back to sleep again. And so sleep doesn't have to be a single consolidated block. And the problem is most people don't know that is the default pattern of human sleep. So we'll wake up in the early hours of the morning, think, oh my God, that's it. I'm never going to get back to sleep, start to get stressed, start doing the emails, drinking coffee. And it's unnecessary, because if you stayed calm, keep the lights low, then you will fall back to sleep again and then drift off to sleep. So I have friends who have little earplugs and they listen to Radio 4, BBC Radio 4 in the early hours of the morning. And I don't think it's any reflection on the programme, but it helps them fall back to sleep again. A few pages of Jane Austen have also been known to work. So it's something gentle and something that can relax you. And I should say that most people don't have a sleep problem. They have an anxiety or a stress issue. And that's the problem. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, then it's going to be much more difficult to get back to sleep if you wake up. And of course, this was the great challenge during the time of COVID, when actually people had a greater opportunity to sleep, but were waking up because of all the horrors that were going on around them. And, you know, the business might be collapsing, or relatives or friends might be dying of this ghastly disease, you know, and so it became overwhelming. And so sleep was very much affected by the anxiety and the stress that was caused by that vicious condition.
Will you say more about the impact of anxiety and stress on sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the relationships are now very clear. That you know, the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, are really the agents that disrupt our sleep, that fail to allow us to relax into sleep. And if we wake, as we all do to some extent, we negative thoughts flood in, and we can't get back to sleep. Which is why I've 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 become a great advocate of relaxation techniques and things like mindfulness. Now, when I first heard about mindfulness, I was extremely rude about it. I had it in the same box as, you know, crystal waving and that sort of nonsense. Uh, but I was completely wrong. I mean, the studies now are very clear that they can really help you. Mindfulness can really help you relax, and it genuinely changes your stress state. So that can be useful. There's also some other, you know, tips that people are using. Again, the data isn't absolutely robust, but certain smells like lavender can help us relax, and either allow us to get off to sleep, or if sort of, for example, lavender or other gentle scents are in the room, that can help you remain relaxed if you should wake and you fall back to sleep. One little tip I do mention is that if you do a lot of travel, and you are sleeping in lots of strange rooms, in hotel rooms, you know, you are more anxious anyway because it's a novel environment. And what you might want to do is, if you have a distinctive smell in your bedroom at home, whether it be lavender or your partner's perfume or aftershave, you might want to have a few drops of that on the pillow, and then you associate, yes, this is my bedroom, this is my place of relaxation, this is my place of sleep. So yeah, I think there's lots of things we can do, and as I say, the first line of trying to get better sleep is trying to get de-stressed and reduce anxiety. And of course, in the society we live in, that is, I appreciate, extremely difficult, but it's at least a clear, identifiable target.
Mm-hmm. I'll share with you anecdotally, when I wake up in the middle of the night now, I've been doing this practice, and I am a mindfulness meditation teacher and practitioner. And
sorry, I hope
oh no, you know, I love it.
No, I'm on your side. I'm on your side now.
Now, yes, no.
No.
And what I do is, like, I'll notice the thoughts, right, or the anxiety or whatever weighing on my mind. And if I just shift my attention into my body, and I can tune into the fatigue that's in my body, I just slip right back to sleep. It's been a really interesting, like, so it's that shifting of the attention between the thoughts and like the ruminating, and then right back into the body, and off to sleep I go. So that's been interesting and fun to play with.
Well, I think that's such a useful bit of advice, because so many people think you get the sleep that you get and there's nothing you can do about it. And of course, stress and de-stressing is one way to get better sleep. And clearly mindfulness is a useful technique for some, not all, but for a significant majority of individuals.
Will you share with us a little bit about sleep cycles? I think that that's helpful for people to understand in the context of waking and what happens. You know.
So we sort of tend to think of sleep, but actually you can divide sleep up into a series of different states. So before we go to sleep, there's a state of quiet relaxation. And then we drop into deeper and deeper sleep. And the brain waves, they increase in size and they become slower. So actually, the deepest sleep is often called slow wave sleep. because these are big, slow rhythms that you can record in electrical activity from the surface of the head. Then, and that's called slow wave sleep. And those states are called non-rapid eye movement sleep, or non-REM sleep. And essentially, it's a progressive going from small, high-frequency electrical oscillations into large amplitude, slow oscillations. But then we bounce very rapidly from 3 to 2 to 1 to what's called REM sleep, and that's rapid eye movement sleep, where you're paralyzed from the neck down, and you can actually see the eyes moving underneath the eyelids. Just fascinating. It's just amazing to watch. If you wake up, you might want to look at your partner and see, these eyes wobbling around under the eyelids. It's a bit disconcerting if your partner wakes up and sees you looking like that. So, if you don't want to risk that, you could always watch your dog or something like that. It is just a fascinating state. And so then from a period, and we would naturally wake from REM sleep. So that cycle of non-REM through to REM takes between 70 and 90 minutes. It changes a bit as we age and depending upon, individuals. And then, so that's 70 to 90 minutes. And then from REM sleep, you go back down into stage non-REM 1, 2, 3, deep sleep. And then you go through a series of maybe 4 or 5 cycles every night. Ultimately, waking naturally from REM sleep. And, I was saying you wake up in the night. Well, we tend to wake up in the night from REM sleep. Now, what's going on during these different stages? It's not absolutely clear, but it is becoming, there's greater evidence for the fact that in deep slow wave sleep, we are probably processing information and consolidating memory. And so stuff is coming in through the day. We don't have the bandwidth to process it and memorize it and manipulate it. So a lot of that is done during deep sleep. So what's REM sleep doing? Well, it looks like it's the processing of emotional rhythms, emotional experiences. And so, for example, if you deprive people selectively of REM sleep, they'll show greater anxiety during the day. And of course, it's REM sleep where we have our most vivid and complicated dreams. So a very interesting study was undertaken in New York after the Twin Towers were destroyed by terrorist action. People were asked about their dream content. And it wasn't planes crashing into skyscrapers. People were dreaming of being mugged or being overwhelmed by a tsunami. And so it's the anxiety dreams increased. And so the correlation was that, people were anxious and the brain was trying to make sense of the world and compartmentalizing these issues during REM sleep. And so some people can get very anxious about their dreams. I, on balance, would say don't be. It's just an indication that the brain is doing what it should do, which is sort of dealing with the emotional states that you're in. So, whilst we sleep, an incredible amount of important stuff is going on. And we don't fully understand what these different states of REM, non-REM sleep are doing. But the exciting thing, and I think one of the great things in the future, is that we are beginning to get a greater understanding. Lots of neuroscientists are now moving into the field of sleep to try and understand what's going on, how information that's been temporarily stored in one bit of the brain is then moved to another bit of the brain, and how it's all being integrated, and illustrating the fact that whilst we sleep, it's not a shutdown of the brain. In fact, some areas of the brain are more active during sleep than during wake. And of course, it illustrates the fact we're doing really important stuff whilst we sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm struck by the importance of sleep on the brain specifically. And I'm curious if you'll talk a little bit more about the impact of sleep and mental health.
Yeah. So if we go back to the 1880s, a chap called Kraepelin, who's called the father of psychiatry, noticed that poor sleep was a feature of what we now call schizophrenia and other mental health conditions. And those studies or those observations were kind of forgotten. And we moved forward to the 1970s, almost 100 years later. And people were given antipsychotics with the introduction of antipsychotics. And the poor sleep and the disrupted circadian rhythms were thought to be as an artifact, a side effect of the antipsychotics, forgetting the fact that for 100 years, poor sleep had been noticed in mental illness. And this rumbled on, so it was a side effect of the antipsychotics. And I was in an elevator with a psychiatrist and in a hospital that will remain unmentioned. And this psychiatrist sort of had recognized me from some meeting and said, "Oh, you work on sleep, don't you?" And I said, "Well, kind of." He said, "Oh, yes, well, my patients with schizophrenia don't sleep. That's because they don't have a job. So they get up, go to bed late, get up late, miss my clinic and don't have friends because they're up all night." And I thought, well, that's one of the most stupid things I've ever heard. So I got together with some colleagues, notably Eileen Joyce at the Institute of Psychiatry, and we studied her patients with schizophrenia. And we looked at 20 individuals with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, 20 who were unemployed, and 20 age-matched individuals. And what blew me away, absolutely blew me away, is the sleep-wake cycles of those individuals with schizophrenia were not just bad, they were smashed, absolutely smashed. And the unemployed were basically normal. They were not statistically different from the employed. So this was not a lack of employment. There was something more fundamental. And it led us to propose a model that the pathways in the brain that are associated with sleep and the pathways in the brain that are associated with mental health overlap to some degree. And so if there's a change in a brain neurotransmitter that predisposes you to mental health, say serotonin or one of the other neurotransmitters, it's going to have an impact upon sleep at some level because the sleep-wake cycle draws from all the brain neurotransmitters. So there's an intimate association mechanistically at the core between mental illness and sleep. And we've demonstrated that using mouse models. So genes that have been linked to schizophrenia, for example, were changed in a mouse. And the mouse was then showing not only mouse-like symptoms of schizophrenia, and I won't bore you with what they are, but critically, the sleep-wake patterns were also breaking down. So we have a lot of evidence now for that core. But of course, it's much more than just sort of a genetic and mechanistic overlap. And this is where the important stuff comes in, because, of course, the poor sleep can exacerbate, because of its distortion of physiology, that increased anxiety, that increased sort of salience of remembering negative thoughts. All of those sorts of things can exacerbate the levels of mental health, mental illness. And of course, the mental illness can feed back and make the sleep worse. So you can go from sort of this predisposition, this sort of mechanistic overlap, but then move very rapidly to a worse state because of that positive feedback where the mental health or the mental illness makes the sleep worse and the poor sleep makes the mental illness worse. So this is a very simple model that we could then predict. So it was obvious, if you can even partially consolidate sleep, do you improve mental health states? And so Dan Freeman, who's a brilliant psychiatrist here in Oxford, who led this study, showed that partial sleep stabilization in people with insomnia showing paranoia and hallucinatory experiences, so they were on the psychosis end of the spectrum. If you partially controlled their insomnia, you could actually have a big effect at reducing their levels of paranoia and hallucinatory experiences. So that was the first large study showing that you can actually think of sleep as a new therapeutic target for mental illness. So I think this is an exciting time, and now psychiatry is embracing this to some degree across the world, and thinking, right, it's not simply an artifact of the antipsychotics or the drugs or the fact that they don't have a job. We can actually do something about it by partially stabilizing the sleep-wake cycle. And in fact, one of the things that we're working on at the moment, because it's we can talk about the various ways that you can try and stabilize sleep now. But what you might want to do for these individuals with really bad sleep is have a short course of drugs that stabilize the biological clock, that regulate the clock, get things back in balance, and then they can go off the drugs and use sort of non-pharmacological agents. So I think it's an exciting time, and I'm delighted to be involved with a range of studies that are looking at it.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm curious, you said, to a degree that sleep is being used as an intervention. Yeah. Will you say more about that?
Yeah. So what this, unpacking the study, it was a digital cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So basically, it's something that people had on their phones, and they were given daily advice based upon their experiences, and said, okay, what you might want to do is get more light in the morning, stabilize your sleep-wake cycle by eating at the same time, going to bed at the same time. It was essentially what's been called sleep health, sleep hygiene, and of course that can be useful, extremely useful in many cases. But if the sleep-wake disruption is very severe, so we work with people who have no eyes. They have, in fact, Blind Veterans UK and Blind Veterans USA. These individuals have lost their eyes or they've been profoundly damaged in combat. And of course, if you've got no eyes, it means you can't set the body clock to the external world. So you then drift through time. And so it's like unremitting jet lag for the rest of your life. And so, it's not a lot you can do at the moment for those individuals. And it really is terrible. And these individuals have not only lost their sense of space, they can't see the world, but they've lost their sense of time because of the damage to the eyes. So, I mean, I'm privileged to meet many of these individuals. And I remember chatting to one chap, and he had lost his eyes, but he's living on a road, and he said, "I'm not going to be the person with the untidy garden. I'm going to deal with this." So he would work out how to get the lawnmower out of the garage, where to plug it in, and he'd worked out ways to cut the lawn, even though he couldn't see it. So he felt this. I mean, these individuals were remarkable. But then his wife came down and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "It's 3 a.m. in the morning. You're waking up the neighbors." And so this man who wanted so much to be normal and do normal stuff like cut the lawn couldn't do it because he didn't know what time of day it was, because his internal clock was completely out of sync with the outside world. And in fact, that's why we're developing these drugs. We've got a drug that will mimic the effects of light on the clock. It's all been tested on mice. We know it's safe in humans, and we're just about to start the clinical trials. And if I can end my career by giving back a sense of time to those extraordinary individuals, I will leave very happy. But it's not just the profoundly blind. We've touched on severe mental illness, like profound levels of schizophrenia, but neurodevelopmental conditions in children. The sleep-wake cycle in those individuals is absolutely smashed, and these poor kids, are getting dreadful sleep. The family's getting terrible sleep, and the kids are so tired they can't then make use of their educational opportunities during the school day with education. So it would be wonderful if we could even partially stabilize the sleep-wake of those individuals. So that's the kind of way things are moving, going, and really, it's a great example of how curiosity-driven research is giving rise to new targets for therapeutic development.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it takes me back to your curiosity, right, as a young child. And I'm sure that's the research. I mean, that is how you embody as a researcher, which is cool.
Well, I'm privileged, of course. Research is a team effort, as every scientist will say. The days of the white-coated, bald-headed white male plugging away in a laboratory is just a myth. I mean, I'm privileged to work with many bright, both young and old individuals, and that's part of the joy, I think, of science. It's a collective endeavor. The tragedy is, of course, collective endeavors are not recognized. for the Nobel Prize, there's only 3 recipients in one area. And that's really tough when you think of the incredible contribution of many scientists to our understanding of the circadian rhythm, for example. Yeah, so we've got to, I think, be much more sensitive to the fact that science is very much a collective exercise, and we need to acknowledge, from both young and old, not people who've just, lived and survived for 40 years.
I'm thinking about how I want to ask this, but so with mental health and sleep, you talked about this cycle. And I'm curious, is it a bi-directional relationship? Is it one starts and then the other, vice versa? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think there's this predisposition because of the wiring. Some people are going to be more vulnerable than others. And, if things are going along fine, then you're probably nudging towards, let's say, a depressive or maybe even a psychotic episode. But it's kind of under control. But then you experience poor sleep, and the whole biology shifts to the more dangerous state. Because, as I say, the poor sleep is exacerbating the level of mental illness, and the level of mental illness is, and so you can go from actually pretty fine to really bad very rapidly. One of the interesting things is that a very good predictor of depression is a change in the pattern of sleep. And that's also true for other mental health conditions. And I have a fantasy that, we can develop a simple wristwatch device that can plot the rest activity cycle for those who are vulnerable in the community. This information will go to a smartphone. The smartphone can then talk to the clinicians, some clinical nurses, for example, and they can sort of see this change in sleep pattern with these vulnerable individuals, give them a call, say, do you want to come in? Should we talk about what's going on? And so in a very gentle way, you can try and preempt a slide into a dangerous state before it actually occurs. So we can not only think about sleep as a therapeutic target, but we can also think of it potentially as an early warning system.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm thinking about someone who has like PTSD and experiences night terrors.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. We've done some work on post-traumatic stress disorder. And we touched on the fact that when you're asleep, you consolidate memories. And we have some lab-based data, which I think is really interesting. So individuals were shown distressing films of funerals, of self-harm. I mean, not horror, but not great stuff. And then one group was allowed to sleep normally after witnessing these movies, and the other group was kept up and not allowed to sleep. And what was so fascinating is that those who were sleep deprived were far less to have those flashbacks and intrusional memories. So in fact, the current practice of encouraging people to sleep after PTSD may not be the best strategy. It may actually be wise to keep them up so that you don't consolidate the memories immediately after the trauma. Now, it's still early days, but I think it's a very interesting way. It's a very interesting relationship. And of course, we talked about dreams and, what's going on. And of course, what dreams are is an abstract, surreal almost version of the world. But what post-traumatic stress disorder is a recapitulation of those horrors that you've experienced. So it's not dreams. It's something very different from dreams. And that's why they can be so extraordinarily distressing. And of course, it's the sort of thing that also some of the veterans that I work with experience. But we are rather interested, I think, in doing more research on what you do after a traumatic event. I was chatting to, as you do, somebody at dinner, and I won't explain where, and they were Irish, and I was asking them about wakes, where the family and friends all gather before the individual is dead to pay their respects and to sort of be a community around this dying person. And what happens is that this community drinks a hell of a lot, and doesn't get much sleep. And both drinking a lot and not getting much sleep will impair memory formation. And I wonder, and of course this is just hand-waving speculation, that I wonder if these traditions have built up because it's a way of reducing the trauma and the flashbacks that you might get as a result of losing a loved one. Now, I'm not advocating, getting drunk and boozing excessively, but it's an interesting correlation, and the extent to which some of our practices. So, after battles, traditionally warriors would, drink excessively, and this is all stuff that would impede memory formation, and they stay up all night. So I think there might be some interesting cultural stuff there. We need a sociologist to look at what people do after combat.
And I'm really curious, and I hope that researchers like yourself will look at this. What is that best practice for sleep after experiencing a traumatic event?
Well, I think on the emerging data, and I have to stress it's the emerging data, I think it might be smart not to recommend sleep, anything that consolidates memory. So what we found, at least in the lab-based studies, is that if you keep people up, you get fewer intrusional memories and flashbacks. Now, we've got to do more research, but I think that's a really fascinating, and it sort of kind of fits with the biology. Sleep is associated with memory consolidation. And what do you see with post-traumatic stress disorder? You see a vivid recall, a vivid memory of these appalling events.
And in the emerging data, is there a length of time?
Yeah, it was, yes. So there are fewer intrusional memories in the people that didn't sleep, and they drop away very quickly compared to the other individuals who are showing intrusional memories that can go on for weeks.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it obviously needs more work, but I think it's an area which is really worthy of further investigation.
Well, and is it the length of time? Like, I'm curious, how long do you have to stay awake to not have those intrusional memories?
Yeah. Well, that's, of course, we don't know. We
That's
got these
part,
individuals to stay up all night. Yeah, and so it was a bit of a hammer to crack a nut. I mean, you may not need a whole night of no sleep, or indeed 2 or 3 nights of no sleep. We don't know, and those are the sorts of really interesting questions that need to be unpacked. One thing we might touch upon is we talked about night shift workers, and we talked about some of the ghastliness that can happen. What I think is important, though, is that the 24/7 society is not going to go away. It's naive to say you can't do shift work. And so I think we need to engage with employers in this whole area. And many employers are frightened of this and just don't want to engage. But they have a duty of care. And so there's a lot that can be done, I think, from the working environment to mitigate some of the effects of night shift work. So if you have loss of vigilance, as we touched on earlier, on the drive home, again, why isn't the employer encouraging the use of apps on the dashboard to stop you falling asleep? If you have, BMW or something, I think they not that I would know personally, but they have those extraordinary devices already built in. If you have a loss of vigilance in the workplace and you're operating potentially dangerous equipment, then you actually make sure there's enough light to increase alertness to actually reduce some of the effects of tiredness. I think poor physical and mental health, which is so common in night shift workers, why don't we have higher frequency health checks to detect these problems before they become chronic? So the drift into diabetes 2 and obesity, we should catch these and maybe use medications sort of to try and get these conditions under control before they become chronic. Obesity, diabetes 2, metabolic abnormalities. So what kind of food do we give our night shift workers? It's about as bad as you could possibly get. It's high fat, it's high sugar, the vending machines are full of chocolate bars. I think encouraging people to take protein-rich, easy to digest snacks is not going to be trivial, but at least that should be an available option for night shift workers. And of course, it isn't. Failure to appreciate the consequences of night shift work, not only by the individual, but also the friends and family that they share their lives with. And so I think educational materials directed at both let's say the individual, but also the person they are, their partners. I mean, in some night shift work in the United States, the divorce rate is some 6 times higher than the same job during the day shift. Partners need to know that this isn't a person that's turning into a monster. Well, in some sense, they are. But this is an inevitable consequence of driving their body outside of its normal biological range. And they need to know that it's, in a sense, not really their fault. I think the variability to cope with night shift work could be related to your chronotype, which we talked about earlier, morningness and eveningness. Well, if you can easily chronotype individuals, they're simple questionnaires. So wouldn't it be smart to get the morning people to do the morning shifts and the late people to do the late shifts? I mean, what you must avoid at all costs are late types doing morning shifts. So the greater the disparity between your biological day and when you're expected to work, the more difficult it's going to be and the greater your chances of exacerbating health conditions. And then I guess finally, these pathologies develop over time. So maybe we should think about, and we don't have the data to support this, but this is a thought. Maybe we should limit night shift work to, let's say, 4 or 5 years. You cycle off, and then you can cycle back on again. And I suppose the other thing that is so important is that many people don't want to work night shift. This is an economic driver. And so we need to think about how we compensate people moving from night shift work to day shift for their health. I mean, the burden that they will have on the state in terms of the medications that they will need and beyond is probably outweighed by increasing their wages somewhat to shift to the day shift. I mean, I think we've got to be more intelligent and less brutal about this whole subject area. And I suppose, yeah, I mean, and the other thing I should just mention, I mean, we touched on poverty. It's lower socioeconomic groups that are in this trap of getting chronically deprived sleep. And just parenthetically, mention a study we did on early teenagers. And one of the questions, we were just interested to see what the sleep-wake patterns of these British early youth were. And one of the questions was, do you share your sleeping space, your bedroom, with anybody else? What we didn't ask was, do you have a bed? And of course, what we discovered is that many of these kids are trying to sleep on the family sofa while the family are watching the TV. They're getting terrible sleep at night. They're struggling through the school day. They're being marginalized from their educational opportunities, and they're therefore caught in this poverty trap, sleep being a critical issue here. So we've got to think about, I think, sleep and socioeconomic groups and think creatively about what we can do. I was told a story actually earlier today by somebody who developed a nursery for poor children, for socioeconomic kids between the wars. And they were aware that these kids were not getting the sleep they needed. So they installed little cots in a room where the kids could sleep. And one young lad came in and said, "You call that a bed? You're not going to fit many people in that," because he was used to actually sharing a bed with multiple other people. And I just think that this is something that we've kind of ignored, and it's something that we could think about and do something constructively.
Mm-hmm. Those are all such helpful ideas on how to support sleep for the betterment of all, going back to the ripple
Yes.
effect and the societal impact that you talked about in the beginning. As we wrap up here, is there anything else that you feel is important for our listeners to know or understand?
I think that we've covered a lot of the ground. We haven't gone into huge amounts of detail about what you can do during the day, what you can do before bed, the bedroom, and in bed. So, and that's a long dialogue, I know, which we don't have time for. But I'd urge you to look at Lifetime, which actually unpacks some of this stuff and gives some simple recommendations about how we can improve our sleep. We so many of us feel that we don't have any control at all. We do. There's lots of stuff we can do. It's a highly dynamic, very flexible behavior that we can have control over. And we should stop being frightened about our sleep, embrace it, and stop worrying about it.
Thank you so much. I love that. And the other piece we didn't talk about are naps, which is one of my favorite things. So we'll have to talk about that another time as well.
Okay. All right.
I love it.
Well, it's been so nice talking to you, Heather. And yes, we must get together again.
I would love that. It's been lovely to have you. Thank you, Russell.
Great pleasure.
Thank you for listening to CASAT Conversations, your resource for exploring behavioral health topics. We hope you found today's conversation timely and meaningful. Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. If you want to learn more, visit us at our blog at CASATOnDemand.org.
CASAT Podcast Network. This podcast has been brought to you by the CASAT Podcast Network, located within the Center for the Application of Substance Abuse Technologies, a part of the School of Public Health at the University of Nevada, Reno. For more podcast information and resources, visit CASAT.org.